Good afternoon. This is Debra V. Wilson in West Yorkshire. It is Thursday, the 29th of November, 2018, and the time is 1200 hours and 10 minutes, and that's GMT. Yesterday, Palestine Solidarity Campaign held a two-pronged event. Palestine Lobby Day 2018, and then later in the evening from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. there was a panel presentation given to the audience. I could not participate in the lobby day portion. First of all, because I'm doing research, and then number two, even if I wasn't doing research, you should have been eligible to vote in a UK election to participate in the Palestine Lobby Day 2018. And I will read from their email what the event was about, the Lobby Day. Join the hundreds of PSC supporters who will be arriving in Westminster to deliver a clear message on Palestine. All participants will be briefed in advance on our key parliamentary ask and what to expect when meeting their MP. This is a great opportunity to get together with those who share your passion for Palestine and to make a real difference. This year's Lobby Day will focus on two of PSC's core campaigns: the treatment of Palestinian child prisoners. Then there's a hyperlink under this entitled Info Fact Sheet, and the demand for the UK to stop arming Israel. And then there's another info fact sheet hyperlink. The Lobby Day will take place on Wednesday, 28th of November from 12 noon to 1800 hours, with all participants also invited to attend a special rally meeting in the evening from 1800 hours to 2000 hours. At this rally, we will hear from experts and politicians on how to secure justice for Palestine. Don't miss this opportunity to be heard. So it was the evening portion of the day's event that I attended, the rally meeting. And it was literally a panel of, as they said, of experts and politicians. So I'm going to go through an executive summary of some of my thoughts about the event. The first thing that I became acutely aware of was, because I've heard it before in other civil society, from other civil society members, and specifically also from this group, responsibility. The members spoke about their belief that they were responsible for helping resolve the human rights plight of the Palestinians, because they felt the UK government had fallen down on her responsibility. And in addition to that, the belief was that the UK was responsible in part for the plight of the Palestinians, so that someone from the UK should be responsible for addressing said plight. I think that's very important because, again, my research is, with the context being Canada, Israel, and the UK, is looking at civil society's experiences of and responses to national security and policing models. So I'm always keen to see how the civil society understands the behavior of the state, and then from that conceptualization, what their responses are. The next item I'd like to mention is the global reach of this organization's activism. It's international. This organization is a British organization, but they are engaged with a group of people in the Middle East, Palestine. I have always been acutely aware that civil society in this country has a propensity to reach out, to look in being the UK, and then to reach out, being the global community. I think if you have the good fortune to live in the country that you have internet access and it's unfettered by the state, you have a realization and that in some ways the world is now borderless. But the UK, the activism, particularly activism out of London, has always been borderless. It's always reached out from beyond self being this country, the UK. Years ago, I asked a feminist why she thought that was the case. She agreed with my assessment. I asked her why she thought that was the case, and her response was she thought it was the remnants of the empire, that the country and all of her citizens have always looked at self, the UK being British, as more than this land in which they live on, and have always felt, in one way or the other, collectively speaking, that they had a right to be involved in the world, good, bad, and different. So when I looked at the audience, the people in attendance, and it's too soon to talk about the demographics of the people who were in attendance, because it simply could be the people who were in attendance, and it might not be reflective of anything else. But that, coupled with the belief that one has the right and should and does look beyond self, your own national identity, where you live, what you call home, and to the world, I think is interesting, and I seek to better understand that. Also, I want to go back to this sense of responsibility, and I was remiss in not adding something. Here in the UK, I have always been acutely aware that relational dynamics just sit right on the top of things. We're always in relationship and in engagement with each other. But here in the UK, despite the stereotypes about the British being very distant and detached, they're not distant and detached when it comes to their politics, and in some regards how they make sense of the world. And they're very much aware of the fact that they're in relationship. And one of the things I found very interesting, and I'm talking left of center, is this. It's almost a disdain for using the word patriotism, but then their behavior can be described as nothing other than patriotic. So I found it very interesting that people felt, and this is the second time I've heard this from this particular group, that the government failed and that it's their responsibility to, metaphorically speaking, to pick up the baton. I've heard that in the feminist organizations that I belong to, that were doing counter-extremism activism, or activism where they were dissecting the national security model. I literally know a plethora of feminists in this country who believed at one time, and in some cases still do, that the state, in terms of constructing what is a threat and how to address it, has it wrong. And when I say the state, I'm talking about Special Branch, SO15, and MI5. Special Branch slash SO15 and MI5. And they felt because the state had gotten it wrong, that it was their job through papers and lectures and petitioning discussions with politicians, help to facilitate a better quote unquote national security model. They felt it was their responsibility. So, from a relational perspective, I'm always curious about the duty of care that some in civil society, it appears to be rather blatant to me and self-evident that it's a duty of care to this country, and that the love they have for this country goes beyond what they may think about a state or government institution. I know feminist activists who are highly critical of some of the behavior of SO15 and MI5, but they have not hesitated to spend hours in group meetings discussing what needs to be done to make them, quote unquote, better and more efficient and more ethical, quote unquote, in doing their job. So I'm always challenged here to understand the nature of relationships between civil society and the state, because if you're looking from the outside, it can appear to be quite the rough ride, quite acerbic and quite abrasive. And sometimes you begin to get the feeling when you're looking at the state and civil society that civil society is complaining all the time, and the state is either operates on this binary of brushing civil society off the concerns, or quote unquote, my word, capitulating with explanations ad nauseum of why we did this. It can seem like it is a fractured relationship, and I definitely think there's some strains and stresses going on in British society in general. But I'm talking about civil society here. For all of civil society's complaints about the state, and you will find numerous complaints here in the UK, there is still a love going on in the relationship, and I say love because they never give up trying. They never give up. So I'm exploring that as well in my research. And the last bit I want to mention in this executive summary of the event I attended last night, one of the things this group is doing, because again I'm looking at civil society's experiences of national security models and policing models, and then their responses. So one of the things that as this group is questioning the behavior of the militarized behavior of Israel towards Palestinians. So when you're looking at the state militarized behavior of Israel, you're talking about their national security model. So there's a great deal of critiquing, dissecting and critiquing of Israel's national security model by this organization and others, but I'm focused on this organization right now. So when that happens, someone told me years ago, if you start poking around, we were talking about the UK, we were talking about SO15 and MI5, and MI6 as well. If you start poking around with the national security model and start asking questions, they're going to poke back and ask, who are you and what are you doing? So with this organization, and again, I'm doing relational dynamics. I do not have an opinion that I'm going to give. It's relational dynamics. So this organization is questioning the national security model of Israel. Okay, and that would be internal. So that would include the IDF, Israel's Defense Forces, and Shin Bet, the internalized intelligence agency, the Israeli equivalent of MI5. So you start questioning and dissecting as a British civil society, Israelis' national security model. They're going to poke back. Now, there's all sorts of discussion in civil society, the world that is civil society here in the UK, and it has been for many years, that Israel, my word, has been poking around in this country. Some of the constructs around that, I would say, are based in fantasy. Some of the constructs, not so much fantasy. So, in terms of relational dynamics, with the linchpin being civil society's responses would be their activism, and the activism here is dissecting Israel's national security model, which no doubt would incur the curiosity, quote unquote, of some in Israel's security model. So then when that happens, MI5, part of MI5's remit is foreign intelligence, looking in here and what they're doing and understand what they're doing. So I wonder, I suspect that's yet another dynamic related to this particular organization. And others like it, but again, I'm focusing on this one. So, my executive summary: the responsibility, duty of care, love coming from civil society, love of country. And duty of care, I would say also, I think it does extend to civil society saying the state, their belief, the state has dropped the baton, we have to pick it up to keep going. Global reach, and how and why civil society, this one, has picked this scope. Okay, part of that is answered in number one, the sense of responsibility, but the global reach and the global perspective that this civil society has, this civil society organization has. And then three, the dissecting, when civil society starts to dissect the national security model of a foreign nation, what does that do to the national security of the nation? Okay? And I suspect when you start poking with dissecting Israel's national security model as part of your activism, they poke back and look back, and they return the look and return maybe some of the behavior, but it's a militarized behavior, and they're spying agencies. And then I think that invokes a response from MI5. So I think I'm looking at that as well as another particular dynamic, relational dynamic, that's the outcome of activism, lawful activism. All right, this is Debra V. Wilson, and I am in West Yorkshire, and thank you for listening.